All right, thank you again, everyone, for joining us for our weekly Facebook Live conversation. This week, we are going to be talking about tech safety for victims and survivors. A pretty important issue, especially right now in the age of COVID-19. Technology is our lifeline to people, but unfortunately for victims of domestic violence, technology can often be misused to abuse them, stalk them, and harass them. So today we are joined by Linda Blosey, who is CCADV's Director of Training and Prevention, and she is going to have this tech safety discussion with Erika Olson and Rachel Gibson from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. So first, just going to turn it over to Robin for some quick housekeeping.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Robin and I will be moderating the conversation today. If you should have any questions, please feel free to insert them into the Zoom chat on the right side of your screen and we will answer them as we go along. Also for our Facebook Live audience, please feel free to enter all of your questions within the comments stream and we will field them as we see them. And I'm going to turn it over to Linda. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Robin. So first and foremost, I want to thank everybody who's joined us today. I hope that you are all healthy and safe, and thank you for your interest in that. So I'd like to introduce Erika Olson and Rachel Gibson. They both are working on a project called the Safety Net Project out of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. So I'm interested in knowing first and foremost, what got you into working around the issue of technology and domestic violence as it intersects. So first, maybe Erika, if you could just tell us a little bit about the Safety Net Project itself, and then tell us how it is that you got there, and then same with you, Rachel. How did you get into this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Linda. So the Safety Net Project is a project of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and we are celebrating 20 years this year. So we were founded 20 years ago to address the intersection of technology, abuse, privacy, and safety, and to look at all the ways that technology can be harnessed for good, how it's misused, unfortunately, as a tactic of abuse, and to really consider how we design technology and use technology so that we are doing less harm and more good, especially for survivors of abuse. So I got into this work. I've been here with the project for 14 years. Prior to that, I was at the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where I got connected with NNEDV and the Safety Net Project, and a year later became a member of the team. So I was doing a little bit of this intersection at the New York Coalition, and specifically looking at how technology was used in the disability community and by survivors with disabilities specifically. So that's my my entryway into this work.
And how about you, Rachel? Rachel, you're muted.
Sorry, I too got my start at a coalition. I worked at the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence as a technology specialist, where most of my job was to take the great work that the Safety Net Project was doing at the national level and apply it to the state of Florida and the 42 certified domestic violence centers. And so I did a lot of training and technical assistance, helping to build that project, as well as providing guidance around technology for communities at the margins, such as the disabilities community, and working with that. And then worked most recently before my return to NNEDV, worked with the Vera Institute of Justice, where I worked on the disabilities project, as well as the National Resource Center for Reaching Victims on their Underserved grant, and came back to NNEDV almost a little over 2 years ago to further this work, because my heart is always will be doing advocacy work, and especially at this particular intersection.
So thank you, and I'm happy to have both of you here today. So I guess, you know, the funny thing is you start talking about the disabilities work that both of you have done, and so when we talk about technology, just as a side note, I think it's always important to talk about assistive technology as well as just kind of mainstream technology. But So why do you think it's so important for us to look at technology when we talk about domestic violence?
Well, technology is a critical part of our lives for all of us. It is something that today's world, in this digital age, we can't ignore, can't get away from. And because of that, it is undoubtedly going to be both something that abusers misuse, and something that survivors need to understand and strategically use to increase their own privacy and their safety. Almost everybody has a cell phone. People are more and more equipping their homes with smart home devices. A significant amount of the population is in some way on some sort of social media platform and online space. And even for the people who are deciding that they don't want to be online, that they don't want to be very active in online spaces, we live in an age of data collection and mass amounts of data and personally identifying information being collected and shared about us online. And all of these things impact survivors, whether they're actively using the technology or not. And what we know is that abusers will misuse and manipulate anything that they can to further their tactics of abuse, whether that's monitoring, surveilling, stalking, controlling, harassing, intimidating another person. And technology is just that. It's another tool that somebody can use for those purposes.
So I guess, when we talk about technology, Rachel, can you just tell us what are we talking about? I mean, I know we're talking about cell phones, but what other kinds of things are we talking about?
Sure. And I apologize. I keep muting because, as many of you know, working from home, you live in a shared space. So just want to be mindful of some outside noise. But I definitely think that technology misuse will look like a lot of different things for a lot of different survivors. For many survivors, it is that cell phone, because phones, we did a survey several years ago to the field, and one of the things that came back was that phones were the #1 device that was being misused. And why is that? Well, because most of us have a smartphone now, and my smartphone isn't just about dialing out or calling people. I bank from my phone, I order pizza from my phone, I play Words with Friends on my phone, I even can do work on my phone. And so our phones have become a critical lifeline to further our lives and to keep us connected. But then we think about other ways that technology can be misused. When we think about social media and someone getting access to our online accounts, or committing non-consensual intimate image by sharing intimate photos on a pornography website, or sharing them with other people. Some people may know the term of revenge porn, or even thinking about stalkerware or spyware, and how someone could place this type of monitoring software onto a phone or a computer and monitor everyone's keystrokes, or where they visit, how many sites they go on. So this misuse, this facilitated abuse, can look like a lot of different things. When we think about communities at the margins, for survivors who may be in the LGBTQ+ community, it could be that someone outs them on social media. It could be that a survivor who may be an immigrant survivor, they may not have access to WhatsApp so that they can call friends and family that are located overseas. For survivors living with disabilities, it could be that their screen reader, or their wheelchair, or their app that they use to communicate or to translate information could be damaged, broken, taken away. So misuse, like I said, can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different survivors. And it's just another tactic of abuse that a perpetrator or an offender, an abusive partner, may use to try to further this kind of harassment, harm, stalking, and isolation and intimidation.
So let's just talk about your cell phone, just like right up front, because most people own a cell phone, like you say. What are the various ways that somebody can use a cell phone, get a cell phone, do whatever with a cell phone that would be considered to be abusive?
Sure. So I think we kind of look at cell phones like a miniature computer. So
Yeah.
for instance, on my phone, if my partner were to gain access to my password, I have a 4-digit PIN, right? And my partner gained access to that PIN. They would be able to go on, say, my Facebook account and post things about me. They could change my password on my Twitter account. They could drain all of the money out of my bank account because I have my banking app. They could, if they were to have physical access to my device, install stalkerware, and then they could remotely monitor what I do on my cell phone. They could use the Find My Phone feature. If they had access to my username and password in my cloud account, they could use the Find My Phone feature to track where I'm at. So the cell phone can be misused in a lot of different ways. That isn't to say, though, that there are not other tactics that can be used, but in terms of this particular analogy, there are a lot of different avenues and ways that we can see phones being misused because of the way in which we use our phones, because there's so much that we do with our phones.
Yeah, I would definitely be lost without my phone. But I was thinking about something else, and maybe Erika, you can comment on it. You know, oftentimes when I'm having conversations with survivors, I'm always interested in knowing who is the owner of the phone. And by that, I'm not talking about who the physical phone itself, but what about situations in where an abuser may have a family type plan?
Mm-hmm.
What happens there?
That's a great question, and I'm gonna take a step back a little bit just to make sure that everybody understands what we're referring to, and broaden it a little bit too, because it's definitely kind of even beyond cell phones. So what Linda's referring to, if people aren't familiar, is the a lot of times you can have a family plan for your phones, but not just those, but for a lot of accounts that we have now. Have family plans where one person is essentially the account owner, and that account owner has access to be able to set up settings, to add new apps, to do different things on the accounts. And with phones, it means that the account owner, so I actually have a family plan with my partner. I'm the account holder. And it means that I have a certain level of control over what happens on that device. I can access call logs. I can access certain information because I'm the account owner. I can also start up a locator plan with our carrier, whether that's Verizon or Sprint. All the carriers have some sort of kind of family locator that a family plan can share, and the account holder can start those plans without real notifications to some of the other people on the plan, and would give them real-time live access to know where anybody else on the family plan is with when they have that device on them. I say that I want to broaden it too, because in more recent times, we're now seeing that same kind of structure with the family plans being used with other things, such as alarm systems that are being installed in people's homes, or some of the smart home technology that people are using. These are often devices or accounts that we are setting up, and because they are meant to be used within the family, there is often one account holder, and that person may have a level of access that not only gives them a significant amount of control where they can manipulate the device or the service or the account so they can get information without the other person knowing, but it also raises a lot of risks and safety concerns, because it's hard sometimes to disconnect someone who has been named the account holder from that account and that plan. So for an example, if somebody has set up a smart home security system and it's connected to their smartphone, if that person is the account owner, it can be very difficult, even when that person has an order of protection, even if they have been removed from the home and they're no longer supposed to be in the home or accessing the home. To the company, they're the account holder. And so they might still, you might have to jump through a lot of hoops at least to get that person removed, so that they can't just unlock the front door by a push of the button on their phone. So those kind of accounts can create a lot of challenges for survivors who are trying to remove access from an abusive person.
So an interesting thing that you say about that with the technology, the smart home technology nowadays, is I did see a situation once with that, and it wasn't the unlocking and locking of the door, but it was the middle of the winter. And like you said, if the abusive individual has an order of protection and they've been forced to leave the home, it's turning on the lights, turning on the music in the middle of the night, off and on, turning the heat on, turning the heat off. And so it's not just about gaining access to the home, but it's just about manipulating everything that can go in the home, you know, during that, at all hours of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to go back because I know, Rachel, you mentioned this, and you also mentioned this, Erika, is that whole idea of spyware and stalkingware and stuff like that. Can you explain what you're talking about when you use that terminology?
Sure. So I'll start, and then Erika, if you have anything you want to add. So stalkerware or spyware is any form of like a software program or app that is used to monitor what someone is doing. So some things that stalkerware will do is, if I type in my Google browser that I'm looking for domestic violence services, the stalkerware is monitoring what websites I go on, or can monitor what websites I go on. The stalkerware can monitor if I downloaded a new app, who I called, if I turn my video camera on. Some of them can monitor that sort of thing. So it's a form of monitoring software program that allows someone to remotely, which means that they don't have to actually be there to see what you're doing, but they can see what you're doing from the comforts of their home, either through a companion app or through an account with the stalkerware or spyware program, to see again what that person is doing. A lot of these apps and programs market themselves as parental monitoring software, or we see a lot of them who use advertising saying, do you want to catch your cheating spouse? Do you want to know what your employees are up to? Put this program on their device and you're able to see that. A lot of these programs run in stealth mode, which means that it's very hard for the general user to detect that these things are running. There are some indicators that can help identify, such as battery draining quickly. It may be that there are some ticking noises, other sorts of like indicators. The person knows too much about you. So for example, if I'm, I have a conversation with Erika and we talk about our love of cheese doodles, and we say that we're going to go to the store at 4 p.m. and buy 14 bags of cheese doodles. Well, my intimate partner comes back and says, I see you went to Wegmans today, and I heard that you were going to buy 14 bags of cheese doodles. Well, how would my intimate partner know that? Well, because maybe Erika and I shared that conversation over Slack or over email. And so stalkerware can monitor our conversations in that kind of way through messaging or email. Erika, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so the only thing I'd add to that is just to let people know too, the difference historically in the terminology is often that spyware, the term spyware has been around for a really long time, and it's often prior to even smartphones existing. We were talking about spyware in terms of computer spyware, and then smartphones were created, and when we introduced the internet onto our smartphones, we introduced an avenue for being able to monitor that device as well. So there's still a significant difference between them. Computer spyware doesn't require physical access to the device in order for somebody to get that on. That's why a lot of the security points that we always hear are about not opening links that we don't know, or clicking on links that might come from what appear to be a strange email or a spam email, because those are some of the ways that spyware can get on your computer. They can be sent over email, just a link that's sent, an image that's sent, something like that we click on, and it can download onto the computer, and from that point on run in complete stealth mode without any notification to you. But it would allow the person to see and access everything you're doing on your computer, turn on the webcam, see into your home, things like that. So it's very scary, and it's very invasive. But mobile phone spyware, or what is often called stalkerware, is a little bit different of a software, and it does all of the products that are on the market now, even if their marketing is quite slick and makes it sound otherwise, they do require some sort of physical access to the phone, or ability to know all of the accounts and the backends to get onto the phone, which is quite complicated. So most of them out there, you're going to need to get physical access to the phone. And that's something that is important, because it's one of the things that we always ask survivors about as a first attempt to start assessing what the person might have done and why they might have known the information that they know. So we look at access to the technology, and then what type of information the person knows, if it's multiple accounts and multiple types of conversations, and they're also in the bank account and the email account, things like that. We definitely want to be considering the possibility of spyware or stalkerware, either on a computer or on a phone. But it often comes down to understanding the access level that the person had, and whether or not they were physically able to manipulate a device. And those are important pieces for people to understand and distinguish between.
So I think a lot of that stuff that you talk about is very interesting. Is there anything else that you might want to just mention that would indicate that somebody's technology is at risk? I know that you started talking about lighting up or some of the things that you mentioned. What else would we look for if we think that maybe our technology is at risk? How would that be indicated?
Sure. And I think Erika really touched on a lot of that too. So I'm just going to reiterate that for continuity. But I think a lot of it really does depend on what the person knows already about the person. Do they know where you've gone? Do they know who you've talked to? Do they know, even know things like your date of birth or your mother's maiden name? Do they know your high school mascot? A lot of the time, these are questions that are security questions when we get locked out of our accounts, or we have to reset our passwords. And so they ask us these questions. Well, luckily, my intimate partner, I hope, would know a lot of those questions. If not, we'd have to have another conversation. But most intimate partners already know this information. And so it's not like they're digging through the trash, finding it, top secret. It's because they already have access to it, because we share these details of our lives. So it's making sure that survivors can think through what that person knows, and then thinking through, to Erika's second point, about what have they had access to. So if they have had access to the physical device of the phone, if they have access to our phone accounts because they are the account holder, if they maybe have had access to our username and password for our email, then these are also some indicators that things may be going on. Another thing to think about too is what's happening when I log on to my Facebook or Twitter or Instagram account. Does it prompt me to change my password a lot? Am I often locked out of these accounts? When my are my devices turning on or off? Maybe if I have children and maybe they've received a new teddy bear, there might be some sort of tracking device and in that. So it's important to kind of, again, think through what are the ways in which the person has gotten access to us as a person, in us as in terms of our devices, and then really thinking about what that person knows. I really think those are two of the grounding principles to kind of help somebody figure out what's going on, because I think those rules will apply whether it's a cell phone, whether it's social media, whether it's my bank account, whether it's my laptop. Finding out those things are going to be integral in figuring out who and what.
Yeah, another example I would give too of the difference between what somebody might be doing based on what they know is the difference between, like, if an abusive person seems to know the content of all of your conversations. Mm-hmm. They know what you've said to somebody on the phone, or they know what you've texted or chatted to somebody on the phone. They were eavesdropping on that conversation in some way. They were able to witness that conversation, and that's the only place that you had that conversation. Then that's a certain level of access that we need to think about. Now, if they don't seem to know the actual content of the conversation, but they just know that you were messaging somebody that they're not familiar with, or you made a phone call to a number that they're not familiar with. So if the abusive person is saying, who did you text? Why did you text this number? Or who did you make this call to? I don't recognize this phone number. That's a sign that the person might be looking at call logs, either physically picking up your phone and looking at the activity you did in a call log, or very likely, if that's really the only thing the person knows, then they might be logging in and checking the call logs that Verizon or Sprint or whatever is providing, because they can see the numbers that you're sending a message to, or the numbers that you're calling, but they can't see the content. So, but if the person knows the content, and you've had that conversation out loud in your home, it could be an eavesdropping device in the home. If they also are making hints to what you are wearing, where you were in the house when you said it, then that actually might be a hidden camera that's in the home. If they just seem to know conversations that you had on your device, but you were texting or chatting online with somebody, but they know the actual content of the conversation, then we're going to want to look at the possibility of spyware, stalkerware being on the device. So that's some of the ways that you want we make the connection between what the person knows and the type of technology that might be being misused.
So I think sometimes in what we've been seeing lately too is that if we have situations in which there's custody and visitation of children, that these kids are coming back into the house with new technology devices that have been given to them by the abusive partner, which then gives the abusive partner access to what's going on in the home as well. One of the things that I oftentimes become concerned about is that people who are experiencing intimate partner violence don't take the technology piece of this as serious as they should, and they look at it like it's nuisance behavior or it's this. And it's even with the constant texting, constant emailing, constant phone calling. But one thing that I often say is old school, you'd be on the other end of a phone line and you knew that person was somewhere else. But nowadays, when we look at these type of electronic stalking and sexual harassment and stuff like that, the interesting thing is that individual could be standing right outside your front door and you don't have that sense of it. So,
Linda, I was going to jump in just really quick. We did have a question come in from the audience. Nancy wants to know how spyware is removed from the phone.
Yeah, I just saw that in the chat. I was going to respond, so thank you for bringing it up. Spyware is very difficult to detect and also pretty difficult to remove. Once you have narrowed it down and you really do think that it's spyware that's on the phone, it's first of all up to the survivor of what avenue they want to take. Some people are just going to want it off, so they can have their privacy back, have the abuse and that tactic stop. And if that's the case, then they're going to want to look at doing a full factory reset of the device. to set it back to original factory settings. And then at that point, setting up the phone in a way that doesn't allow the spyware to get reinstalled. And that means not bringing it to a Verizon store and having the person think that it's just some regular old malware or virus, and reconnecting your phone to its backup. Because if they put the backup back on, meaning that when you walk out of there, all of your contacts, all of your previous text messages, everything is still there. If that's there, then likely the spyware is also going to be just reinstalled. So you're going to want to do a full factory reset on the device, and then manually start to reset the set up the phone, putting in all the contacts, things like that, which can be quite burdensome, but it's an important step to make sure that the spyware isn't reinstalled. If the survivor actually is wanting the person who put the spyware on to be held accountable, and they're wanting to collect evidence around that, and they're wanting to work with law enforcement, if it's safe for the person to do that, and that's the avenue that they want to go down, then they're going to have to talk to law enforcement or advocates about how to get the phone analyzed for the spyware. People are not going to be able to just detect it on their own because of the functionality and the way that the spyware works, and it's completely in stealth mode. It is going to need a forensic analysis to be able to actually detect that it's there and prove that it's there. That's a much more complicated process. The only alternative for proving that it's really there, which people have done successfully in cases, is getting access to the abusive person's, their records, their cell phone records, their computer records, their credit card records, things that are going to show that they purchased, that they downloaded, that they used and accessed multiple times the spyware that was on the device. So those are going to be the potential options, and it always, as with anything else, depends on what the survivor wants to have happen.
So, you know, when you talk about that, engaging law enforcement and stuff, is technology abuse actually a crime itself? Like, what kind of crimes are we talking about here?
Yeah, and it is a crime. I think it's important that we, you know, let survivors know that there are ways to mitigate this if they so choose to do so. Because again, I do think oftentimes I've worked with a survivor who had some intimate photos of hers shared on a site that she didn't want it to be shared on. But she was also a model who did nude photos and was perfectly happy with those photos being on the photographer's website, but didn't want them on the pornography website. And she just didn't want that. She didn't want to press charges. She just wanted those photos taken down. And so I think it is important to let survivors know that there are alternatives to seeking criminal recourse, but if they so choose to do so, that is an option. I do know that in your state, Connecticut, right? We're in Connecticut.
Yes, we're in Connecticut.
Okay. That there, you all do have a stalking law and cyber stalking law on your books. And I was just quickly reading through that, and it's a pretty robust law. But it also too is helpful to know that even if for whatever reason that maybe you can't, it may not be under maybe domestic violence or sexual assault, that there are other ways to get there are laws that can help, such as voyeurism, identity fraud, computer hacking or monitoring. So there are alternatives to do that. And I would be remiss if I didn't put a shameless plug in for our womenslaw.org website. And these are trained attorneys who can provide information. I will say they do not provide legal advice, but they do have a state map of every state and territory that lists specific laws around domestic violence, around technology, and they are a great resource if you need additional help trying to figure out what law may be applicable to the crime that the survivor is experiencing. Great.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we do have some progressive laws out there in Connecticut. I'm pleased to be able to say that. But I think, you know, just as with anything else, you have to weigh the pros and cons of engaging law enforcement and the possible, you know, unintended consequences of doing that as well. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and let's start talking about the safety aspect of using technology, how survivors can keep themselves safe. Because, you know, we did talk about some of these different types of technology abuse, and the fact that sometimes they go unnoticed, sometimes they, you know, they don't come up until later. So, you know, even for anybody, whether it be a survivor or your average person, how can they keep themselves safe technologically?
Yeah, and I think really the question should be, how do we stop abusers from abusing and perpetrators from perpetrating? And I think we had to put the onus back on the people. But
Right.
there are strategies that survivors and the regular everyday person can employ to kind of mitigate some of that, and to help give them extra levels of protection. So one of the things that I think is important is to know that one strategy is not going to work for every survivor, but giving survivors all of the ways in which they can minimize risk and minimize some of this is important. One of the things I think about is documentation. Documenting the abuse, and especially with technology, because we know that we may post things or tweet things, text things, TikTok things, and when we put them up there is a chance that once we choose to report, that those things may be taken down, and so it might be harder for us to go back and get that evidence. And so it's important for survivors, if they want to document, not only for their for criminal or civil, you know, recourse, but also because maybe they just want to, you know, show a pattern of behavior, show that conduct, that course that's happening. And so documentation will be important. And so it's important for survivors to know, to put down the who, what, when, where, what device is being used, and the context of that abuse. Because one of the things that we talk about a lot with survivors is context is important when we talk to law enforcement, when we talk to judges, because we need to help them understand why this may have caused you undue stress, may have caused a reasonable person to feel fear. And so we have to give that context. And so you can either use, say, for documentation, a paper. We have a paper form that you can fill out on our website, or we have just released on May 7th, 2020, our DocuSAFE evidence collection app. And whatever a survivor uses, whether it's DocuSAFE, whether it's paper, they are going to really have to weigh the risks of doing that. For survivors who may be concerned about spyware or stalkerware, for survivors who may be concerned that their abusive partner is monitoring their device, DocuSAFE app may not be the best option for them. Maybe they want to use a paper log that they can lock away or put in their car. But for survivors who may not have that risk, DocuSAFE could be an option for them. And so it's really thinking about how can survivors kind of document and collect that evidence for later use. One of the other strategies, some other quick strategies that I'll talk about is changing passwords and using passwords that are going to be hard for the person, intimate partner, to guess, but easy for us to remember, which I feel like is easier said than done, because I have had to change my bank account password in the last couple of weeks during my home buying process because I keep forgetting it. But again, we want to make sure that survivors can remember the password, make sure that it's a strong password and that someone can't easily guess. A piece of that, though, is when we think about even like our security questions. Our security questions often, again, asks us our mother's maiden name, our pet's name, our first car. And a tip for everybody is Google or Twitter or Instagram, they're not going to know if we lie on those questions. So we could put that our mother's maiden name is our dog's middle name, or whatever the case may be. So this is how we as advocates can help survivors really strategize around some of that. The other thing to think about is, who are our friends and followers? I quite recently have started deleting every morning. I think of it as a way to be cathartic, but I delete people from my social media accounts that I don't really talk to every day. Well, in cases for survivors, this is critical, because if they have people that they're friends or followers and they maybe don't talk to, or maybe don't have a relationship with, they could be sharing information to our abusive partner or anyone else, and they may be able to collect that information. So it's important to know who our friends and followers are. And then lastly, in this piece, I'll talk about that survivors should be able to go and identify the privacy and security settings of their phone, their computer, their Facebook, their Twitter, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, whatever they're using. Know those privacy and security settings. And what are the differences between that? So a privacy setting is something that I can control. So the survivor has the ability to control who can see what on my account. They can control if someone tags me in a photo, if that photo is posted on my newsfeed. So I think of it as a way of control that I have. And then security settings are settings where someone, the company gives us this. They give us the ability to have a two-factor authentication. So meaning I have my password, but I also can do a text message, or I have to identify myself if I log in from an unidentified account. So that's something that the company gives us. So these are just a few quick points, but I keep pointing you all back to our techsafety.org website that has a survivor toolkit. And this survivor toolkit lists a lot of strategies and safety planning tips for survivors around the Internet of Things. So we talked a little bit about like Alexa or smart devices. It has tips and strategies around stalkware, tips and strategies around phones and online safety. So that survivor toolkit is going to really be a great hub for any survivor, or even I actually have sent our survivor toolkit to friends and family who are becoming more tech savvy, who are becoming more, they're using different social media. And I say, read through this material and then apply it to your own personal use. And it's a really good way for people to kind of have bite-sized chunks of information on how they can kind of safety plan around all of that.
So, you know, you mentioned this one thing, and it's something that I have on most of my stuff. I have it on my email. I have it on most of my social media as well, is that two-step authentication. Can you just explain a little bit further, because that does give you that extra layer of protection in a way?
Yeah, so I look at it as a password is the key to my door. So the password is the first step, but two-factor authentication is, for me, like an alarm system. So someone may have found, which is probably plausible in my life because I lose my keys quite often. So say somebody finds my key and maybe they get the key into the door and they can open the door, but my alarm system is on. And so it triggers an alert to me. So two-factor authentication works like that, in that the password is the first step, and then two-factor means that I either have to insert a code, or I have to, on my phone account, if I get on Google from an unrecognized device, I then get an alert on my phone that says, is this you? And I press yes, and then it lets me in, or if I press no, then it'll lock down the account. And so that's kind of how two-factor authentication works, is that it gives you a second way to identify you are who you say you are. The issue, though, that some folks may run into, especially, say, for survivors who may have to flee and maybe not be able to take their phone or whatever with them, is that it does require that you have access to, say, my cell phone or my other app. And so for survivors who may have that issue, these accounts do give you other types of ways to identify yourself. So for instance, it may ask you to put in your last known password. It may ask you to identify when you set up this account. It may ask you to use your backup email address that you have on file. But that's a little bit about two-factor authentication and how it can give you an extra layer of support and help. And I will say that a lot of the tech companies that we work with often say they have two-factor authentication on their accounts, and they really stand by that. So that's something that survivors can consider as well.
Yeah, I have two-factor authentication for my work email. I have two-factor authentication for my personal email, for my social media. And mostly it is because if somebody is trying to log into my account from a different device, so you know how sometimes it'll ask you, okay, do you want it to recognize this device? And you say yes. But then there's times where it's just like, if somebody is trying to poke around and get into my account, I do want to know that. And so maybe I might say, like, it's two-factor authentication can be really good, especially if it might be the beginning stages of an abuser trying to get into somebody's cell phone or somebody's social media. It'll give people an alert right up front if it's set up that way to start, as opposed to like you go in later and try to set it up.
Exactly. And more security is not harmful. I mean, more security in these sorts of situations are helpful, because it does give us that extra layer. And even if it's not an abusive partner, even if it's someone, I actually just got an email yesterday. I use a finance website that kind of helps me do my budgeting. I got an email that they had a data breach. And so it gives us, again, another layer of protection, even to help identify if someone has gained access in a nefarious way. So I think we talk a lot in confidentiality work that less is best, but in this particular situation, I think more is, I don't have a rhyming word for more, but more can be better in this situation, because it does give you an extra layer of protection.
So let me just ask you this then. When we talk about technology, you know, as a group of advocates, what is it that you think that we can do to support support somebody, or even not just support people, but maybe on an ongoing basis, talk about technology? So what are tips that you can give advocates that might be on this live chat today? You know, what should we think about? I think a lot of times people don't think about asking the questions about technology. You know, we ask, have you been hit, pushed, shoved, slapped? You know, do you feel belittled, and all those kind of things. But what are some questions we can ask people about technology that might alert somebody to the fact that, yes, maybe this is happening to me?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and you've already started it. I know you're a seasoned tech advocate, so that's a great way to start that, because it is, you know, technology plays such a large part of our lives, even for survivors who don't necessarily use technology. I always think about my mom, who has a very small digital footprint, but because her and I are connected, and because she lives in a county where the deed to her home is online, because she served on a parent-teacher association as president, and her name and information was on the online minutes, there's still technology. There are ways that technology can be misused if she had been in that kind of situation. And so it's important for advocates to really kind of, as we safety plan with survivors, as we say, maybe the abusive partners being paroled, then the safety plan changes. And the safety plan changes and includes technology. Maybe the children are going to a new school. The safety plan changes, and the safety plan includes technology. So whatever we are doing, wherever that safety plan changes or morphs, we are including technology, because we know that it is so intertwined in survivors' lives. The other thing is that survivors really should be in control and be leading the conversation. Advocates are there to provide support and to provide tools and resources, but especially when we think about technology, the survivor is the expert, and they know what's best for them, and they can kind of gauge their abusive partner. We often hear a lot of times people say, well, why don't they just get off tech? Just don't use it anymore. Just delete it and it's gone. But I think about social media and technology kind of like the city of New York. Well, it doesn't sleep. Even if we press delete, even if we exit out, that abuse could still be happening. And so survivors know how and can gauge what their abusive partner may react. And for some survivors, it means that staying connected to their abuser online means that they can gauge how they are going to be that day. That's a safety planning strategy for some survivors. Knowing that they're posting really hateful messages means that maybe the violence might escalate for them, and so they can plan accordingly. So that's a safety planning strategy. And then making sure that we get survivors connected with community partners that are culturally specific, and making sure that survivors also know the gaps and limitations to what we can provide as service providers, I think is important. And then letting survivors, again, be empowered and giving survivors the ability to be empowered and giving them the tools and resources to make the best decision for them. So I go back to that survivor I worked with who was the victim of non-consensual intimate image sharing. And I said, you know, here are all of the things that you can do to seek help. You can get legal recourse. You can have the website take it down. You can file criminal charges. I gave that person all of the things that they could do. And then once that person had that information, they picked the option that worked best for them. So I think that's important. And then I think one of the biggest things, especially when technology is involved, is to start by believing. Oftentimes survivors come to us, and by the time they get to the Safety Net Project, they've gone to their local law enforcement, their local victim services provider, their local court system, and they're tired. And they're saying to us, we have told these people that someone has turned the air conditioning on in my home, and I don't know how. They keep showing up outside of my door. I installed a Ring camera and he will stand and look in the camera. I have posted on my blog and my partner has taken it down. And they often will come and say all of these things, and the service providers will say, well, that's not possible, or we don't know what to do for you. Or recently I heard someone tell a survivor that we don't take those sorts of crimes seriously because it's not life or death. And so I think it's really important as victim advocates, we have to really advocate on behalf of survivors to make sure that they have access to all of the information, access to supports, and that we just generally believe them, because this may be the one and only time that they reach out to us for help. And so we want to make sure that we have done our due diligence as advocates to give them the resources, tools, and strategies that they deserve and need.
Erika, do you have anything to add to that?
That was a perfect rundown of all of our major, our principles and our talking points. I think the last thing is I just want to kind of piggyback on the important point of making sure that we are truly empowering survivors, providing people with information, and not making judgments and telling people what to do with their technology. This is truly about making sure that we hold abusers accountable for their behaviors and support survivors. We have heard over the years, and I know you've heard this as well, Linda, because we worked together for many years.
Yeah.
A lot of reactions, knee-jerk reactions to these conversations, because technology is overwhelming. It's scary, and I get that, but we've seen a lot of knee-jerk reactions where people do just want to kind of take technology away. They want to minimize it and tell survivors to just get offline, change your phone number, things like that. But it's so important for us to remember that not only can that be so disempowering to survivors, but it can actually be dangerous. We've heard so many situations and stories where somebody was able to know that the person was escalating. They got a message from the abuser that let them know that they were on their way to their house, and they were able to escape that way. So as Rachel said earlier, which I just want to make sure that we repeat because it's such an important point, some survivors are maintaining access or allowing access or maintaining connection because it does give them that ability to see where the abuser is, to identify those patterns, to be able to safety plan in a way that is effective for them. And even when people do want to disconnect and stay away from the abuser, they still often want to stay online. They want to stay connected to other people. They want to decrease the isolation and increase the support. And that is so important. We have to understand how the technology works, so that we can talk to survivors about it. For example, we used to hear a lot from people about, things where advocates would say, I just want to get survivors to stop posting pictures on Facebook because that's going to tell the abuser where they are. When in fact, there's a huge misconception about the type of information that people are going to get by posting photos. If we're concerned about location and survivors being able to relocate, restart their lives without the abuser being able to locate them, the conversations we need to have are not actually so much about posting your photo on Facebook, because you're not, most likely, unless you're taking a photo of the front of your house with the numbers on it, you're likely not going to be able to get an address or anything from that. But you may be able to get actual location information from an image if it's posted on a website. If the person is starting a business for themselves and creating a website for their business, whether that's Etsy or a standalone website for their local business in their community, those places, registering to vote, signing up for information when you, like Rachel said about her mom, getting information about where somebody lives because you bought a home, if you're a homeowner. There are lots of ways that abusers can get information that survivors need to be aware of, and we need to help survivors navigate online spaces and just the data that can be available about them online, but do that in ways that is not going to be disempowering and is not going to take away the channels that people want to use to decrease isolation and increase support.
Okay, so thank you so much. We only have a couple of more minutes, and so I do want to get to, I did see that there was one question, there was a couple of questions, but one in specific is the issue of how do we as advocates, as people who are operating safe homes and everything, help people to stay safe? What's the, how do we work with people who are bringing cell phones into the shelters as well? How do we make sure that we're keeping them safe, we're keeping everybody safe as well?
This is a really common question that we've received, and I think first of all, we want to take a step back and think about all the ways that you're already doing that, and all the ways that you're limited in doing that, because there is never going to be a completely foolproof way to ensure that an abuser is not going to be able to track somebody. That exists with or without technology and with or without people coming in with devices. If somebody is driving a car to your neighborhood, if you have a parking lot, people are following other people's cars. They're seeing, if you live in a more rural community, abusers are getting a heads up from neighbors and other family members and friends, like, hey, I saw so-and-so's car over in this area or on this block. That still happens and has always happened. So our ability to really stop somebody, to stop an abuser's behaviors, are always going to be limited, because there's only so much we can do to control somebody else's behavior. But what we can do is try to minimize the likelihood that somebody could be tracked and traced, and increase somebody's awareness about what the tools that somebody could misuse to do those things. So if somebody's coming into a shelter or a space and they have devices, you do want to have a conversation about, was there a family plan? Was there physical access to the phone? What are the privacy settings on the phone? What are the apps that are on there? Another knee-jerk reaction that we've often seen is to take away phones right at entry, to not allow people to come in. And we strongly strongly discourage that. We do not encourage that as a practice. I wouldn't come into a shelter if that was the practice and the requirement of me, for many reasons that we don't have time to go into. But we want to, do the same thing we've always done in terms of that safety planning. How do we minimize that risk?
Exactly. And I think that, we still have to, there's additional questions that we can ask too is, if your partner were to find you and know that you are here, what would be the likelihood that he or she would come here too? Because for some people, maybe they know that they're at a location, but they're not necessarily going to go there. So, it's just like anything else, it's a risk assessment where you look at this and then try to do your best in terms of safety planning. So we only have about 1 more minute. I just want to say thank you to both of you, Erika and Rachel, and I hope that we answered your question, Karen, about Zoom through the chat line there. Just give us just a quick and dirty about the app, DocuSAFE, and then where we can find all this tech safety information.
Sure. So DocuSAFE is located in your iTunes and Google Play stores. Again, this is a conversation that we really want advocates to make sure they're having with survivors before they download, so to make sure to assess if this app is the right thing for them. But the app is set up in a way that it's free, that survivors can upload digital media. So if they have a screenshot, video, pictures of abuse that they may want to put in the app for safekeeping, they can do that. Then that information can be emailed via a secure encrypted link to law enforcement, to an attorney. They can also email or print that information for their own safekeeping, as a reminder that advocates should not be keeping survivor documentation. I do have to put that little caveat there, but survivors can use that to communicate with their attorney if they have one, or law enforcement, and or store their own data. And so DocuSAFE, we have worked really, really hard to make sure that it is understandable and easy for survivors. We put a lot of disclaimers and caveats in there. Erika always jokes that this is probably the one app that we, put out there, but often tell people, but don't use it if it's not safe. We are always trying to make sure people have all the right information. So DocuSAFE is, like I said, out there. If you have any questions about the app, or you notice anything about the app and think, maybe y'all should add this, we are very, very open to feedback, and definitely want to hear from survivors how this app is helpful or could be improved on. So you can email us at safetynet, and I'll put that in the chat box as well, safetynet@nnedv.org, for any other feedback you might have on that.
So thank you both. I hope this was of interest to everybody and you got a lot out of it. And I'll turn it back over to Liza. Liza, you're muted.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. So let me back it up. Linda, Erika, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I just want to close out our weekly Facebook Live conversation with how victims and survivors can access help here in Connecticut. So here in Connecticut, CT Safe Connect is our domestic violence resource hub. Our advocates are available 24/7. All services are confidential, safe, free, and voluntary, and bilingual services are available. So you can reach us via call, text, chat, or email. So go to ctsafeconnect.org or call or text 888-774-2900. And after you speak with a Safe Connect advocate, they will make that safe connection out to one of our 18 member organizations. So these are our members who provide direct services, ongoing support locally in your community. And then please do follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you have any questions about today's presentation, you can contact Linda at lvelozzi@ctcadv.org. And if you can, join us next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. We're going to have a presentation on a number of state-level benefits, Medicaid, kind of what's going on with that during COVID-19. So we hope to see you next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.